Well, here is what Calvin says. Somewhere in communist Russia, I bet there's a little boy who has never known anything but censorship and oppression. But maybe he's heard about America, and he dreams of living in this land of freedom and opportunity. Someday I'd like to meet that little boy and tell him the truth about how awful this place really is. Calvin, be quiet and eat the stupid lima beans. In a world that is filled with so much evil and suffering, why does it so often seem that God is silent? Why doesn't he do more? Why doesn't he do something? How long, O Lord, the psalmist says. How could you trust a God who is silent in the face of evil? We could phrase the question this way. If God is all-powerful, all-loving, and all-powerful, why does he allow so much suffering and evil in the world? We could think of many incidents of large-scale suffering. The 20th century provides ample evidence for this. It's filled with examples like concentration camps during the Holocaust, the gulags of Soviet Russia. We can read the stories, you can see the movies. That was one of the things that was unique about World War II, because for the first time you could see pictures, you could even see video of true and unimaginable evil, things that especially the sort of scientific progressivist community that thought that science was going to progress us to a place of utopia and end suffering, things that they literally could not imagine human beings could do to one another. World War II also gave us a new reference point for evil, Adolf Hitler. And so that becomes the gold standard of evil. And so now we can say, I might be bad, I might not be perfect, but at least I'm not Hitler. And this is really a way of sort of othering evil. We can say evil is something that happens out there, but evil is not so much in here. And so we call the people that we don't like Hitler, saying they are the source of evil. But as the Gulag Archipelago puts it, which exposed the evils of the Soviet state, the line separating good and evil passes not through states, not between classes, not between political parties either, but right through every human heart. There was a newspaper that once asked people to write in answering the question, "What's wrong with the world?" And so G.K. Chesterton took this upon himself, brilliant theologian, could have written books about this. And he writes back to the newspaper with 2 words: I am. That's what's wrong with the world. I am. Sin exists inside of us, and it creates all sorts of opportunities for evil. And we see them all the time. We live in an era where we are constantly exposed to negative news. You can see horrible things happening all over the world, constantly in the 24-hour news cycle, and there are things that we can't do anything about. There's situations that we can't possibly intervene in. We can't help with those things. And so what we do instead is we take God and we put God on the witness stand. And we say, God, you're the one who could do things about all of these horrible things I'm seeing on my feed. Why don't you do something about it? And so instead of God being the judge and instead of evil being a problem for us, evil becomes a problem for God, and we take the place of the judge with him on the stand. Dostoevsky, in his famous novel, The Brothers Karamazov, he said that when you put God on the stand, he said the problem with that is that God is not replaced by some superior morality. You can't come up with a better answer. Instead, what happens is now we're the ones in charge. We're the ones trying to define right and wrong for ourselves. And what that means is anything goes. And so might is made right. Power is ethical because we're in charge and there's no standard of morality. But this problem really is more than news stories. It's more than historical events. It's more than things that happened in the 20th century, isn't it? This is the cancer that is eating away someone you love. This is a baby dying. This is a child with a terminal condition. This is a marriage that's falling apart. This is loneliness. It's depression. It's anxiety. It's personal. It's you. It's me. It's the people that we love. It's our family. It's our friends that are going through suffering. Suffering is the personal experience of each and every person. And so even more than this is a question that we need to answer, this is the human condition. This is what everybody experiences. And so it's not a theoretical question. It's more than an apologetic question, even though we're obviously talking about that tonight. The question of, God, where are you when I am suffering, is a deeply personal question. It's the biggest question. But suffering is also the biggest apologetic. When you are able to get the things that I'm talking about tonight, when you are able to, through a lifetime of faithfulness to the Lord, when you are able to suffer well, that is the biggest witness to the watching world. That is why Christianity exploded in the early church, because you had this tiny group that was being incredibly oppressed by Rome. They were being burned at the stake. They were being crucified and then burned to light parties for emperors. And yet, they were filled with joy. They kept increasing their numbers. They kept loving one another. They would never turn back on their faith. And so the blood of martyrs became the seed of the church. And that's just as true today. When we suffer well, when we are able to do what Paul says, when he says, I was sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. When you can be sorrowful, yet always rejoicing, the world sees it. And they ask you for the answer, for the hope that you have. And then you're ready to give a defense, like 1 Peter 3 says. And so it is our biggest apologetic. And so how do we respond to these things? How do we respond when we see great evil out there? How do we respond when we see great evil in our families, when we see suffering that we are experiencing? I want to give you 4 things. I believe it's 4. Yes, 4 things. 4 things, and you can write each of these down. I encourage you to do so. Number 1. Evil and suffering proves God's existence. It proves God's existence. Here's how I would put this one succinctly. If you are accusing God of being unjust in the face of evil and suffering, where are you getting the standard by which you're judging good and evil? Evil folds in on itself and actually ends up proving that God exists. We all believe in things that are truly right and truly wrong. We believe that there are things that are not just preferences. We believe that there are things that are above us that we need to submit to, even when we don't want to. We know that there are things that we should do even though we don't want to do them, things we should not do even though we want to do them, and they are above our feelings. Just because I feel like lying, that doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it okay. It's more transcendent. It's more universal than what evolution through different group selection processes can account for. It's beyond that. We know that. And so the only place that this can come from is a God who is a moral law giver. If we affirm that there is a moral law that is universal and eternal, even if it has some flexibility within cultures, if we believe that there is any type of high moral law, then there has to be a moral law giver. If you think that people shouldn't suffer, if you think that the strong should not crush the weak, if you think that the vulnerable should be protected, that only makes sense if those people that you're saying should be protected are made in the image of God. If they have dignity that comes from somewhere outside of themselves. If they're made in God's image, then they're worthy of dignity, they're worthy of human rights. If they're not made in the image of God, then they're not worthy of those things. Otherwise, we are just accidents of chemistry. We are the product of blind natural forces, and we have no more intrinsic value in us than bacteria, the bacteria that evolved to make you. If that's where we came from, then we cannot claim that God is unjust when he allows evil and suffering in the world. You could say that you have preferences. You could say, I have moral preferences I prefer that people are not raped. I prefer that children are not murdered, but you cannot call it wrong unless there is a God who gives a moral law. People today still live with a residual foundation of Christianity. We still have imported Christian values into our society in many places. And so they want it both ways. They want to judge God, but they want to use a standard of judgment for right and wrong that they learned from God. And so suffering is a bigger problem for secularism than it is for Christianity. What secularism does is it removes all purpose or good that might be found in suffering. But guess what? It doesn't remove the suffering. The suffering is still there. If you say, I'm going to reject God because of this, you're still going to suffer. Christians are not the only ones that suffer. And so our culture today gives no help, it gives no guidance to people that are experiencing suffering. We talked last week about how we got to this place psychologically with our identity. If our greatest goal in life is my own personal, individual, internal, psychological happiness and comfort, if that's my greatest goal, then suffering is an interruption. It's an interruption to my life story, to what I need to be doing in this short life that I have left before I get buried in the ground and everybody forgets about me. And so I must minimize suffering at all costs. Through pills, through substance, through distraction. I'll distract myself out of suffering because it has no purpose. There's nothing that it can bring to my life. Or you can turn to other religions. You can turn to other religions to try to import some value into suffering. But when we compare all of those religions, we find that they don't hold up either in comparison to the Christian worldview. The Christian approach to suffering is completely unique among all other worldviews. Here's how Timothy Keller puts it. Look at this closely. Christianity teaches that contra fatalism, suffering is overwhelming. Contra Buddhism, suffering is real. It's not just an illusion. Contra karma, suffering is often unfair. But contra secularism, suffering is meaningful. There's a purpose to it. And if faced rightly, it can drive us like a nail deep into the love of God and into more stability and spiritual power than you can imagine. That's what the Christian worldview offers when it comes to suffering. Number 2, free will, evil, and suffering. So what we've been talking about is a theological category called theodicy. Theodicy is not the Odyssey. It's not the book by Homer that is being adapted into a movie by Christopher Nolan that comes out next year, of which tickets are already sold out for the 70mm IMAX releases. It's also not a minivan. Now, theodicy, one word, Theodicy. It is something that the church has talked about through its history. And it goes all the way back to the early days of the church. And it simply means defending God with the existence of evil, or in relation to the existence of evil and suffering. And so the most classic theodicy is relating to free will, and it goes back all the way to St. Augustine. So we could say, in its simplest form, we could state it like this. God created us not to be robots or animals of instinct, but free, rational agents with the ability to choose and therefore to love. But if God was to make us able to choose the good freely, then he had to make us capable of also choosing evil. That's the free will theodicy. And so this means 3 things. Number 1, people have the free will to harm others. People can choose to harm others. People do harm others for a variety of different reasons. Sin causes them to do that. Somebody might harm somebody else if they say, I can harm this person, but ultimately it will be a benefit to myself. They might harm somebody to cause something that they might think accomplishes some ultimate good. There's many other reasons why people hurt other people. You've probably heard the phrase, hurt people hurt people. People who have experienced suffering often can become psychologically wounded, and they can inflict suffering on others. And so hurt people hurt people. That's number one. Number two, when a good thing gets twisted in creation, it causes harm. If you are worshiping something more than God, if you are treasuring something more than God, that thing becomes an idol in your life, and it will crush you. Your marriage might be a beautiful marriage. It is a terrible God. Your kids might be amazing kids. They make terrible gods. The expectations you put on them will either crush you when they don't live up to their expectations, or they will crush them with these incredible expectations you've put on them, which then in turn will crush you. And so when we elevate these things, when we elevate these idols, success, money, family, health, food, all of these different things, if we elevate these things to the highest place, then they cause a tremendous amount of harm, because your idols can never fulfill you, and they can never die for your sins. Only Jesus can do that. They will hurt you, and they will cause you to hurt others. This is the argument behind Romans chapter 1. We shared a lot of Romans chapter 1 last week. Won't share the whole thing, but this is what it says. It says, they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images, that's another word for idols, made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And because of that, what's the result? They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity, envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice, gossip, slander, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, boastful. They invent new ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. I've always thought it was funny they throw that one in there with all these other ones. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. What are all of these things? Starting right here, what's all this? These are things that hurt people. These are things that cause suffering. If you do these things, they cause suffering in your life. If you do these things, they cause suffering in somebody else's life. We have been victims of these things from others, and we have been perpetrators of these things. Why? Because we have exchanged the glory of the immortal God for idols. Number 3. C.S. Lewis, similar to number 2, he talks about in The Problem of Pain, which is his theodicy book. He talks about how when you rebel against the natural law, when you rebel against God's natural law that he's put into the universe, it will rebound. It will sort of snap back at you like a fish jumping out of water or a train becoming derailed and going off the tracks. It's going to cause a lot of harm. And so God, when he created the universe with a certain moral grain to it. Right? You know, when you're cutting, we're about to do Thanksgiving, you got to carve up that turkey, you know, and you got to cut meat or cut wood. There's different things. When you cut with the grain as opposed to against the grain, that's the way you're supposed to do it. That's what allows it to function the way that it's supposed to function. And so in the same way, the universe has a grain that's been built into it by God, and when we go with the grain, it is for our flourishing. When we go against the grain, it causes harm. It's abrasive to us. We cannot do it like a fish jumping out of water trying to be free, or a train going off the tracks talking about how it's gonna throw off all of its boundaries and all of its shackles. And so the natural law will snap back at us. 2 examples. If you are going down a water slide, I've always been a little bit afraid of this, and you go so fast that you hit that one corner and whoop, you fall out of the water slide, are you still having fun? No. You've broken free from the constraints of the water slide, and it's not fun anymore. You have to go with the water slide to enjoy your time. Number 2, did you know that if you take a spaghetti noodle, you hold it by both ends, and you bend that spaghetti noodle, it will almost never break into only 2 pieces. It will almost always break into 3 pieces or even 4 pieces. And so they did a study of why this is. I hope this wasn't our tax dollars going into this. But they did a study of why this is in 2005. It took all the way to 2005 to figure out why spaghetti breaks into 3 pieces. They did this at SIT, the Spaghetti Institute for Technology. And what they found What they found was when you bend a spaghetti noodle, it creates kinetic energy that stretches throughout the whole noodle. And so the parts that are leading up to the part where it's going to break, let's say it's going to break in the middle, these parts on the side are being bent and storing a tremendous amount of kinetic energy. And so as soon as it snaps, that kinetic energy is released, and it creates more breaks as that energy is released. The universe is the same way. When you resist the natural bend of the universe, it will snap, and that stored kinetic energy is going to hit you in the face. It's not going to work. It's going to cause pain. It's going to cause evil. It's going to cause suffering. And so we need to listen to the realities. We need to listen to the grain of the universe. C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man says it this way. He says, "For the wise men of old, the cardinal problem of human life was how to conform the soul to objective reality. Now, the problem is how to subdue reality to the wishes of man." Reality always snaps back. You cannot resist it. So, number one, suffering proves the existence of God. Number two, free will, evil, and suffering. Number three, the mystery of God. The mystery of God. Let's, to do this one, let's break this objection to Christianity down into its logical parts. You could state it in a logical syllogism like this. Number one, a truly good God would not want evil to exist. An all-powerful God would not allow evil to exist. Number two, evil exists. Number three, therefore, a God who is both good and powerful cannot exist. And so this objection, sometimes you'll see it sort of takes, there's three possibilities. The objection states that either God is not powerful enough to stop evil, and this is true in dualist worldviews, and so where you have good battling evil and you genuinely don't know who's going to win. Yin and yang, they are constantly at tension with one another. The good will never ultimately overcome the evil, and then evil will never ultimately overcome the good. And so God's either not powerful enough to deal with evil, or probably more common in monotheistic worldviews like Christianity, God is maybe not good enough to deal with evil. And so that's more common in the West. In the East, you see more of that first one. God is all-powerful. God could stop the evil if he wanted to, but for some reason, he just doesn't want to. He doesn't have the desire to. So maybe he's not all good. He's all-powerful, but maybe he's all good. Or the secular option, God doesn't exist. If you are saying, if Christianity says that God is both all good and all-powerful, then he cannot possibly actually exist in the same universe with so much evil. The thing missing behind this entire argument that we're looking at here is an assumption. The assumption is this, that God has no good reason to allow evil to exist. That's the assumption. It is before you even get to this logical argument. When instead, it may be that someone has a desire for something and is even able to obtain that thing, but they don't act on that desire because they have reasons for not doing so that outweigh the desirability of the thing. I can want something, but I can have other reasons for not obtaining that thing. And so therefore, God might have reasons for allowing evil to exist that in his mind outweigh the desirability of the non-existence of evil. God has something in his mysterious thinking that allows that to happen. And we see everyday examples of this. And so you don't need to go too philosophical to think about this. Doctors need to inflict pain to bring healing. The surgeon's knife hurts, but it's necessary to cut out the cancer. Nobody would say, I am going to avoid this temporary pain. I'll just die a horrible death instead. They're going to take the less painful option. Doctors often need to do that. Parents, we do this all the time. Parents allow their children to experience some pain so that they will learn and they will grow. I'm not going to stop my child from riding a bike because I know that at some point they will fall. They will. Teaching my kid to ride a bike will cause them pain. and I'm going to teach them how to ride a bike, because the benefits of that outweigh the pain that they experience. I'm not going to refuse to teach them how to play guitar because it's going to hurt their fingers for a few weeks while they're learning, while they build up their calluses. The benefit of knowing how to be proficient at a musical instrument outweighs the temporary pain that they might experience in their fingers. You see this in a disciplinary sense too. If a parent takes away a privilege from a child, that causes pain. In our house, that could cause a big fit. That could be a big issue. But it is better than that child growing up selfish and with no self-control, because that is going to cause them much more pain later in life. And so we inflict a small amount of disciplinary pain now to save them from the much greater pain of being selfish jerks later. And so sometimes we have reasons that our kids don't understand. And so we could say it like this: a God who is infinitely more powerful than us would also be infinitely more knowledgeable than us as well. And so we can state it this way: if God is infinitely knowledgeable, why couldn't he have morally sufficient reasons for allowing evil that you just can't think of? Maybe he does. Alvin Plantinga, he gives the example of looking for something called no-see-ums in a tent. Now, we don't have no-see-ums out here, but they're a really small gnat. I meant to get a picture, but I forgot. And so this really small, tiny gnat, they're usually 1 millimeter in length. And the thing about no-see-ums is you can't see them. That's their defining characteristic. And so here's how Alvin Plantinga relates that to the problem of evil. He says, I look inside my pup tent, and I don't see a St. Bernard. It is then probable that there is no St. Bernard in my tent. That is because if there were one, it is highly likely that I would have seen it. It's not easy for a St. Bernard to avoid detection in a small tent. Again, if I look inside my tent and I don't see any no-see-ums, this time it is not particularly probable that there are no no-see-ums in my tent. The reason is that even if there were no-see-ums there, I wouldn't see them. They're too small to see. And so now the question is whether God's reasons, if any, for permitting such evils are more like St. Bernard's or more like no-see-ums. Given that God does have a reason for permitting these evils, why would we think that we would be the first to know? Given that he is omniscient, and given our very substantial epistemic limitations, it isn't at all surprising that his reasons escape us. He has reasons that might be beyond us. You can look for the no-see-ums, but you might not always see them. Here's how Timothy Keller summarizes: if you have a God infinite and powerful enough for you to be angry at for allowing evil, then you must at the same time have a God infinite enough to have sufficient reasons for allowing that evil. The problem of evil was not widely perceived to be an objection to God until modern times. Modern human beings have far more confidence in their reasoning powers and their ability to unlock the mysteries of the universe than did ancient people. The belief that because we cannot think of something, God cannot think of it either, is more than a fallacy. It is a mark of great pride and faith in one's own mind. God might have reasons that we don't understand, and God's not going to tell us what those reasons are, just like he didn't tell Job. Isaiah summarizes it this way: for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. There are many things that we do as parents that our young children don't understand. So think about what is the span of wisdom and universal understanding between our children and us? Let's say it's 5 wisdom points. I don't know what the scale is, but I'm just using that. Now, what is the gap, 24, what is the gap between our understanding of the universe and reasons that God might have for doing anything that he wants to do, and God's understanding of the universe? It's a lot more than 5 or 24. It's infinite. It's infinitely high as the heavens are from the earth. How high are the heavens from the earth? Infinitely high. That's the point. You don't go up into space and find heaven. It's infinitely high, and that's how much higher his reasons are and his thoughts than my reasons and my thoughts. And so we submit ourselves humbly to the mystery of God. I have known people who have left the church and have walked away from the Lord because they were suffering and they couldn't possibly believe in a God who would allow them to suffer. And so one important thing for us to remember before we do this is just asking the simple question, what's the alternative? What better alternative are we going to go to? If you walk out on God because you are suffering, what do you gain by that? Will your suffering end? No. Christians suffer, non-Christians suffer. The rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. The sun shines on the righteous and the unrighteous. It happens to both. Do you draw comfort from the fact that your suffering has no purpose and now nobody is going to help you? That's not very comforting. We have an 8-month-old at home, and he is our 5th kid. Is he at home? He's probably downstairs in the nursery. He is our 5th kid, and by far our worst sleeper. You'd think we'd have it figured out by now. You know, we've sleep trained 4 kids, and we're like, we got this. And then God's like, here's Rowan. Have fun with that. And so we get no sleep. It is absolutely brutal. And so, we'll put him in his crib, and he'll start crying, and we're like, okay, we gotta go help him. We go help him. Instantly starts crying again, and so we're doing this whole process. Now, he's crying in his crib because he wants mom or wants dad. Does it help him while he's crying to think that mom has left and is never going to return to help him? Does that help him? No. That's going to make it so much worse. All you've done when you do that, when you walk out on God because of suffering, all you've done is you've removed vital resources from yourself that can help in the midst of suffering. You have stripped them from you, and now you have nothing to turn to. There's nothing there for you anymore. And so what's the alternative? What worldview gives a better answer than Christianity? I went to college with a guy who married the love of his life. This was around the same time. I knew this guy. This was around the same time that Savannah and I got married. And they were an adorable couple. Like they loved each other so much. It was like the Princess Bride or something. They were so cute together, and his love for his wife and her love for him was just parallel to none, except for Savannah and I. And as they get real close to their 1-year anniversary, it was right around the time they'd been married for 1 year, and she starts complaining about a headache that was getting worse and didn't seem like it was going away. And so they go in to get it checked out, and it was a brain aneurysm, and she was dead within 24 hours. And this young man lost his young wife. A couple months later, a professor came up to him and asked him, going through this process, this must have rattled your faith. How is your faith? Is it still intact through this process? And he said, of course. He said, where else would I go? Who else has the words of eternal life? That was his answer. And so what are those resources? What are those resources, not just theoretically, not just hypothetically? What are the resources for us when we walk through something like that? When we walk through something devastating? Number 4. God's response to the problem of evil isn't an explanation, it's a person. We can say this one, we can state it like this. Christianity is the only worldview that not only says God cares about our suffering and will one day end it, but that he entered into our suffering with us and for us in the person of Jesus. Jesus was God made flesh. And when he took on human flesh, he entered into our darkness and our weakness. Hebrews 5:7, it says that his life was filled with fervent cries and tears. Even his birth was a moment of suffering. We're about to celebrate Advent. Advent is celebrating the coming of Christ to earth, and we got all these cute little nativities, and all the little manger scenes and all this stuff. And all of that is cute. That's been sort of, sanctified, Christianized. But Jesus, remember, he was born in a cold barn. There wasn't even room for him at the inn. He was surrounded by stinky animals. There were animals in there. And he was laid in a feeding trough that they tried to clean out because they didn't have a crib. That's how God entered our world. Like that, as humbly as possible. He took off everything to enter our world. He grew up in a poor family. He knew poverty. He was misunderstood by that family. He experienced abuse, despair, disappointment. This is what Isaiah predicted 700 years before it happened. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. He was oppressed. He was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. Why did he do that? Why? The part in the middle tells us, surely he has borne our griefs, and he has carried our sorrows. He was pierced for our transgressions, and he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. This is what brings the peace that surpasses understanding. Jesus, as he's going to the cross, he went into the Garden of Gethsemane and he cried out to the Lord time and time again. He cried out for another way. He said, please let this cup pass from me. Let's do this another way. And God said no. What was the cup? The cup was the cup of God's judgment. It was the cup of God's wrath. It was the cup of suffering. And Jesus drank it to the dregs. He drank our suffering all the way down. His friends abandon him. One betrays him, another denies him. He's condemned on false charges in a complete mockery of justice. He's whipped, and then he's crucified. Crucifixion was the most physically horrific death that a person could experience. The Romans invented the absolute most painful way that anybody could die. And that's how Jesus died. But the worst part of what Jesus experienced wasn't physical. That was bad. But our big question, remember, is why is God silent in suffering? That's the question we're trying to answer. When Jesus was on the cross, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Silence. That's what Jesus was met with. He was met with the silence of God in his suffering. And so now in our suffering, we can have his presence. 2 reasons why Jesus did this. Reason number 1. There is nothing that you can suffer that Jesus hasn't suffered. He was tempted in every way that you were tempted. He has suffered everything that you could possibly suffer. He knows what it's like. You have a friend in him. So often we tell people as a comfort to them, oh, I know what you're going through. And we don't. We may have gone through a similar situation, but we don't know that person's context. We don't know that person's background. We don't know that person's specific situation. But Jesus does. Not only because he went through it, but also by the Holy Spirit because he lives in us. And so when we suffer, he suffers with us as the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Christ inside of us. He weeps with us, and he collects those tears in his bottle. Number 2, so that he can make a final end to evil and suffering without making a final end to you. That's why he had to go to the cross. What's wrong with the world? I am. That's what's wrong with the world. The sin that causes so much suffering is right here. That's where it sprouts from. It's not out there, it's in here. I am the problem. And so if God is going to wipe out sin, that means he's going to wipe me out with my sin, because this is where it is. Unless there's a way to kill the sin without killing me. How could God do that? That's what Jesus accomplished on the cross. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. God is a God of justice. God will punish every evil act with perfect justice and mercy. It will either be that payment will either be paid by that person in hell, or it will be paid by Jesus on the cross when that person puts their faith in him and repents of those sins. And that is true not just for the most evil people. That is true for every single one of us. But we know at the end of time that the way that God shapes it out, we will be in full agreement with. When we see him, we are made like him. We have his eyes, and we see what he's doing with the world. But we know that the cross wasn't the end, was it? 3 days later, he rose again. He rose as the first fruits of the new creation. And so now we know also we have a great future hope that he's coming back to make a new heavens and a new earth without suffering. It won't be there. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. C.S. Lewis says it this way. He says that people say that no future bliss can make up for a particular instance of suffering, not knowing that heaven, once attained, will work backwards to turn even that agony into a glory. It's not just a consolation prize. Heaven is a restoration of all things, all of the evil that you've experienced, every particular instance of suffering that you have gone through will be redeemed, will be restored, will be glorified when heaven works backwards in a new creation. Tolkien, in the end of The Lord of the Rings, puts it like this: everything sad is going to come untrue. That's the future that we have. That's the hope that we have. Timothy Keller says it this way: yes, we do not know the reason God allows evil and suffering to continue, or why it is so random, but now at least we know what the reason is not. It cannot be that he does not love us. It cannot be that he does not care. He is so committed to our ultimate happiness that he was willing to plunge into the greatest depths of suffering himself. He understands us. He has been there, and he assures us that he has a plan to eventually wipe away every tear. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this plan. You will wipe every tear from our eyes. There will be no more sickness. There will be no more death. There will be no more anxiety. There will be no more mental illness. There will be no more cancer. There will be no more crying, Lord. We look forward to that great day, Lord. And in the meantime, you went to the cross so that you can be with us in the midst of our suffering. And so let that be our reality, Lord, both for us and for the people that we know. When the people that we know are going through suffering, let part of your presence to them, encouraging them, let that come through us. Give us wisdom. Give us words to speak. Give us truth to teach as we minister to those who are going through suffering as well. do these things for us, I pray. Amen. Well, let's take some questions. What questions do you guys have? Oh, let me do some books while you're thinking of questions, so I don't forget again. A couple books on this topic. My favorite one, it's a little bit longer, but very manageable. My favorite one is, I don't even have the dust jacket for it, but it is Timothy Keller's Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. And so you've seen a few quotes from that along here. Amazing book. It's broken up into 3 sections. One is sort of the culture and suffering, kind of cultural apologetics and suffering. The second section is kind of answering the problem of suffering. And then the third section is the most particularly helpful if you are suffering or if you know somebody who is going through suffering, and that is walking with God through the furnace. And he has, it's 5 or 6 different specific practices that you can commit to while you are suffering that will give you those resources that we've been talking about. And so I've had a few times where I've been experiencing suffering and I've turned to those last pages of this book. There have been times when my wife Savannah has experienced suffering. I'll literally go there, highlight a big section, put a post-it note, start on this page, end on this page. Here you go. And so it's been an incredible encouragement to me. So I recommend that one. Paul David Tripp, Suffering, also very good. Tripp, everything that he does is awesome. It's gospel-centered, and so I commend that one to you as well. One more very short one, if you're like, I don't like reading books. This is Colin Hansen. This recently came out in the TGC Hard Question series. Where is God in a world with so much evil? Starts with a gripping story about the Holocaust and then moves through the answer to that question. Where is God in a world with so much evil? Why is God silent in a world with so much evil? Very accessible, easy to get to. And then finally, there's a chapter, and a few of these apologetics books, Confronting Christianity has one, but another good one in The Reason for God. If you haven't picked up a copy of this yet, Timothy Keller, he has a chapter in here that is titled, How Could a Good God Allow Suffering? It is chapter 2, and so you can check that out as well. All right, with that being said, what questions do you guys have related to this topic or anything else before we close out apologetics for this year? Jeremy's going to bring you the mic so that people on the live stream can hear you.
All right, so my question is about the lecture you gave on losing your salvation a few weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
And I was reading a verse, it was in Galatians 5, and this is when Paul is writing to the church in Galatia. He says, you are severed from Christ, you who would be justified by the law, and you have fallen away from grace. So the way that I read that is that they were severed, implying that they were once in the body, and they were fallen away from grace, meaning that they were once in grace. So my question would just be, how do you reconcile a verse like that with the belief that you can't lose your salvation?
Yeah, good question. I would reconcile a verse like that the same way that I would reconcile the verses in Hebrews. And I think the overwhelming, as I said in that lecture, I think the overwhelming evidence points to many, many, many other verses that say you cannot lose your salvation. And so that particular verse, I think, where it says, you who would be justified by the law. And so the whole problem in Galatia, the reason why Paul was so angry, is because the church there in Galatia they've abandoned the gospel. They walked away from the one true gospel. In Galatians, it's really interesting. Every epistle follows a particular formula. It always starts with an intro, and then it moves into a section of thanksgiving, then it moves into a section of teaching, and then into a section of application. Galatians is the only one that has no thanksgiving in it whatsoever. Paul's like, hey, I'm Paul, servant of Christ, yada, yada. What the heck is wrong with you guys? That's where he goes. And it's because they've abandoned the gospel. They were trying to be justified by the law. He says, you who would be justified by the law, implying they are not justified either by the law or by anything else. And so when it says that they've fallen away from grace, I don't think that means they've fallen. He doesn't say you've fallen away from justification. He doesn't say you've fallen away from salvation. He says you've fallen away from grace. Grace is what is offered to us that we then have to receive by faith. And so he's telling the Galatians, you are trying to be justified by the law. Therefore, this offer of grace that would actually justify you, you've fallen away from. You're not going to be able to receive it anymore. And so this serves as a dire warning for the Galatians, for those people he was talking about who were not yet saved. And it serves as a dire warning for us for Christians to stay in the faith. We should always be examining ourselves. And so we cannot, should we go on sinning so that grace may abound? By no means. We need to constantly be examining ourselves to make sure that we're in the faith. But one of the ways that God preserves his people is through warnings like that warning in Galatians. What's next? There's a question in the balcony. Maybe you just shout it out.
What is good, what is evil, and how that relates to suffering? You hear people say things like, it's for the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really true?
Well, it depends on what they're saying is for the greater good. I think often that particular statement comes from a sort of ethical pragmatism or consequentialism, and there's all sorts of different ethical theories that we can get into. But I think that defining good is what God defines as good. If God is our ultimate moral standard, then the character of God and what God labels as good, what God has created as good, that is what is good. What is evil is ultimately evil by subtraction. And so it is evil by the way that it distorts the good. And so in the same way that, and this also sort of answers the question, is God the author of evil? Which is a big objection that comes up. Did God create sin? Did God create evil? No. God, Jonathan Edwards, he says, God didn't create sin any more than light creates darkness. Light doesn't create darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. And so evil is the absence of the good. Evil is a vacuum state, and so it is the absence of the good that manifests in particular actions, it manifests in motivations, it manifests in thoughts. And good can manifest in actions, it can manifest in motivations, and it can manifest in thoughts. I think, it's for the greater good. If someone is using that to commit an action that is deontologically evil, so I think the Bible is deontological, meaning if something is good, it is good by nature of the fact that it ascribes to a higher good moral law. Something like pragmatism will say, you could kill a few people as long as it is for what you call the greater good. And so that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches a deontological ethical system, which says that there are things that are objectively bad. Killing people is objectively bad. And so whereas pragmatism goes to something else. So, yeah.
Okay, so yesterday we were talking about like first, second, and third tier. And I have a friend who is Christian and believes that Jesus is the Son of God, but he doesn't believe that he is God. What would you say to that?
I would say that he is wrong, that Jesus is God, and I would put that as a first-order issue. And so I think it was Irenaeus who said that if we lose the deity of Christ, he says, if Jesus is not God, then he cannot ultimately save us. And if Jesus is not man, then he cannot ultimately represent us. And so he needs to be the God-man in order to be the sacrifice that was necessary for our salvation. He needs to be man in order to represent us as that sacrifice. And so when we lose the deity of Christ, we lose his power to save. And you can see the deity of Christ all over in the Bible. There are places where the Bible says it explicitly, like John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And that's Christmas. That's what we celebrate as Christmas, God becoming flesh. There are places where, like in Matthew 28, for example, Jesus says, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. If you are baptizing somebody into the name, it's going to be the name of God. Thomas, after he doubts, he sees the holes in Jesus' hands, he sees the holes in Jesus' feet, he falls down on his face and he says, my Lord and my God. And Jesus doesn't rebuke him. Angels, when they are worshipped, like in Revelation, and John sees this tremendous first vision of this angel, and he falls down on his face as though dead. The angel gets him and he picks him up and he says, stop it. He says, don't worship me. You can't worship me because I am just a servant like you. Anybody who is if you worship anything other than God, that's idolatry. Jesus was not only worshiped by example, he commanded worship. in multiple places. And so he is explicitly called God. He does things that only God can do. He is given judgment over the world. The world was created through him. It was created for him. It was created by him. Names that apply to God in the Old Testament apply to Jesus in the New Testament. There's multiple quotes that are used of Yahweh in the Old Testament, and then those quotes, when they're quoted in the New Testament, they apply specifically to the person of Jesus. Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega. He's the first and the last. He's the judge of the entire earth. All things that only God can do, all things that only God can be called. And yet Jesus is called and does those very things. And so that's why Jesus is God, and our salvation is at stake. Christianity is at stake if we give up on the deity of Christ. And this was the big issue at the Council of Nicaea in 325. The big issue is it was between two very significant Greek words. Is Jesus homoousios or is Jesus humoiousios? Is Jesus of the same essence as God, or is Jesus of a like essence to God? And that right there is the dividing line between Orthodox Christianity and heresy at the Council of Nicaea. And the Council of Nicaea determined that he is homoousios. He is of the same essence as God, not just a similar essence. Anything else?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for all your work that you've put into preparing this to share with us. It's really helpful to hear, so thank you. And I was curious if, real life application, someone who is not a believer, who does not have a relationship with Christ, asks us that question, if we get into that conversation of, if God really is supposed to be all loving or all powerful or all knowledgeable, then why? Instead of offering a direct answer, like you laid out a fantastic series of answers, I find it's really helpful to get a better understanding of where they're coming from, to ask a question. So I was curious to hear, what kind of question would you ask somebody who started that conversation with you?
Yeah, I think, and that's great, and that's a great just general apologetic strategy. And this I've found this just to be a great life strategy. If you are entering into a potentially difficult or tenuous conversation, lead with questions. That is always a good thing to do. And so in this particular instance, if somebody is saying, how could a good God allow so much evil and suffering in the world? I would first get a understanding of their context when they say suffering. And so what I mean by that is something like, what suffering have you experienced? What have you personally gone through? Because it's very different if they're going, I was in this Religion 101 class in my community college, and my professor said that God can't exist because of evil. That's a very different place that person is coming from than my wife died last week. How could a good God allow this? I'm going to handle that person completely differently. Those two people are in completely different places, and so getting an idea, are they presently going through suffering? In which case, we're not getting into the apologetic stuff. We're getting into the practical pastoral stuff. We're getting into basically only point 4 of what I shared tonight is probably what we're getting into in that second situation. On the other side, if somebody this is more theoretical, it's more I'm asking the question, where we're engaging in this dialogue, and they're doing it not from a place of arrogance. They are humbly actually asking the question. They're not just trying to gotcha, not just that kind of thing. Then the first question I'd probably ask is, well, where do you get your idea of what evil and suffering is? And that's the question I would ask, and that's the first question we asked tonight. Where do you get that idea from? Where does it come from? And then I'd go into the basis for morality. I have a good explanation for why I can object to God for allowing so much evil and suffering, because I believe in objective right and objective wrong, and objective wrong is objectively wrong. And so what about you? Why? How can you object? Why do you think that some things are evil if we're all just products of evolution and we're all just chemical reactions and we're just biochemical soup that just sort of manifested into what we are now, and we're going to die and there's going to be no purpose to it? How you could say you don't like something, but how could you say it's actually wrong objectively? That'd be the first question I would go to in that kind of situation, in an apologetic kind of dialogue. Anything else? One back there.
Did God create hell, and if he did, why?
Wow, good question. Who's your father? I think that it's very similar to the what we were talking about with good and evil. And so God did not create sin any more than light creates darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. And so when you have an area that you are shining light into and that light is blocked by something, that creates shadow. And I think that is essentially what hell is. Hell is not the presence of something as much as it is the absence of something. That doesn't mean that there's not punishment there, active punishment, but when we turn our back on God, when we tell God, I don't want to be with you, when we tell God, I don't want your presence, at some point God says, okay, and he gives us what we want. And what we want when we say that is hell. That's what hell is. Now, in terms of the specifics, did God have to create a space, a dimension or something where departed souls that have rejected Christ and evildoers, where they go? Maybe. I don't know the specifics to that, but the basis of what makes hell is not God creating something to punish people. He's not this big guy in the sky pulling the lever, like, oh God, oh finally now I can give my life to you. Too late, boom, and then he pulls the lever and they go down into this place called hell. It's not that. It's people who have rejected God and they've set their life on a trajectory of pride and arrogance and rejection that eventually consumes them. They're completely consumed by their sin, and then they end up in hell, which C.S. Lewis calls a prison locked from the inside. And so that's the essence of what hell kind of is as it relates to this. Okay. Oh, one more up here.
One thing I noticed, my father was born in Czechoslovakia, and you remember when we took you on a trip back there to see our relatives. And one of my cousins, who was newly married, not unlike your story, her new husband, developed a brain tumor and died. It was awful and tragic. But I think the thing that was even more tragic for me, besides feeling horrible for her, was that I knew that they had no faith because of the rampant communism that they had in their country. And so when we would talk with them about God, being able to see him again in heaven and to be with him, they just had no knowledge or understanding of that. How do you explain to a person that has no concept of what God is when they're in the midst of suffering?
I think you have to understand, how much conception or lack of conception they have in relation to God, and so, they have some understanding of, even in the old communist bloc. Some of those early quotes that I had from Dostoevsky, from the Gulag Archipelago, those are both from Russian writers, from Soviet writers both of them were deeply Christian. And so there's a deep Christian influence in Russia before Marxism took over and communism took over, and before the 20th century, where they took over the Eastern Bloc and divided Berlin and all of this stuff. And so there are deep, just like in the U.S., even though we've moved away from Christianity, even though Europe's moved away from Christianity, there's still Christian roots there that give us a reference point when we're talking about certain things. And so that's true over in the East as well, over in Soviet Russia, and therefore over in Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic now. And so I think that there is a reference point there, but I think if you have somebody who literally has no reference, like let's say a missionary context, I think you start at the very beginning. You just tell a bigger story. And so you tell a bigger story of answering the biggest questions that every worldview has. Where did I come from? What's wrong with the world? How is it fixed? And where am I going? What's my future? And therefore, what's my purpose? And so with somebody like that second question is especially going to apply in that situation. If you're able to say, what what I believe is that we were created by a divine being. We were created by God, and he made us good. But what's wrong with the world is not communists. What's wrong with the world is it starts in here. It starts in our heart when we lie, when we steal, when we do things that we ought not to do. And then if that continues and blossoms and that goes unchecked, it turns into communism. It turns into something that is very, very violent, that can cause a lot of devastation in the world. And so how is that fixed? Well, it's fixed through Jesus Christ. And so God, the same God who created us, he didn't leave us in our sin. He sent his son to die on the cross for us, so that even in the midst of our tremendous suffering, even when our spouse dies from a brain condition, we know that we can have God's presence because of what Jesus did. And we know that we have a beautiful future. We know that we're going to the new heavens and the new earth. So you just have to broaden out the story a little bit if there's no reference or no understanding and you're trying to walk somebody through suffering. And I think in that case, the best thing you can do is just walk with them. This is what Job's friends did right before they opened their big fat mouths. It says that they went to Job and they sat with him for 3 days. And that's the best thing they could do. And so just being with them for an extended period of time through suffering, you're able to have numerous, this isn't something you're going to be able to do in like a 2-minute conversation over the phone. And so it's something that you do as you're living life with this person, walking through suffering with them. And they see your witness. They see your hope that you have as you experience suffering. And they go, how do I have that for the next time I experience suffering? Good. Okay, yeah.
So what would you say to, like, as a child might hear verses, ask and you shall be given, seek and you shall find. What do you say to someone, a young person or a child who is prayed to God and asked God to intervene on their behalf or on their family's behalf when it's been like a sickness or there's alcoholism or there's divorce or maybe not divorce but fighting? Or what would you say to a young child who's walking through suffering, and how should they see that? And how do they reconcile God not necessarily shifting it?
Yeah, I think it depends on the age of the child. And so you can talk really differently to a teen or preteen than you can to like a 5-year-old, for example. And so I would say that, number one, God always hears you, even if you don't think he does. God hears you. God listens to your prayers. And if God doesn't answer in the way that you want, it's because he has a really good reason that we just don't know. And so God, he knows things, just like I know things as a parent that you don't know. Far above me, God knows things that I don't know. And so he has really good reasons that I can't possibly understand. But we know that all things work together for the good of those who love him. And so somehow, what you're going through is actually going to be better for you in the end for having gone through it. And so you could use language like that. If you have maybe a little bit of an older kid, one thing that I like to do when talking about why God doesn't answer prayer requests is I'll say, I can think of at least 10 major prayer requests through my life. I'm talking big stuff. Somebody I wanted to marry, a job I wanted, a school I wanted to go to. I can think of maybe like 10 of those prayer requests that in hindsight, I am so thankful God didn't answer. And that relates to the small stuff too. When I ask God to take something away, God, take this suffering away, and he doesn't, there are times where in hindsight, I'm so glad that he didn't. If I didn't break my ankle and that didn't take me out of my senior year of pole vaulting, even though I went to state my junior year and I had scholarships lined up, I never would have been in ministry, never would have gotten married, my kids wouldn't exist. If God had taken that from me, that suffering from me. And so, the way that you can think about it is if you look back 10, 15 years earlier, you think about the stuff you were praying for, you think about the stuff that you thought was so wise, and you realize, I was a fool back then. And so you go back 10 years before that, and that person thinks that other person was a fool back then. And you could just keep going. And so what that means, really, the way that Tim Keller puts it, what that means is right now, you're a fool, you just don't know it yet. But in 15 years, you're going to realize it, that the things you're asking for right now are actually not the things you should be asking for. And you're going to be real thankful that there are some things that God doesn't give you. And so you can give that answer too, and then go into some of the apologetic stuff we talked about if it's an older kid. Yes?
Gospel Project, going back to, or the Bible Project, no, Gospel Project, going back to hell, talks about hell not being a actual location. Could
Right.
you respond to that?
Yeah. You're probably talking about the Bible Project. Gospel Project is like a kids ministry curriculum that we use, so hopefully that one's legit. Yeah, Bible Project, I won't give a broader commentary on Bible Project for sake of time, but I think that that's true in the sense, it's not a location in the sense that you can drill down into the earth and find it. And so just like the famous Russian cosmonaut, he went up into space, first cosmonaut in space, and he went up there and he said, I looked everywhere and God was nowhere to be found. And so C.S. Lewis responded to it, and he says, you don't find God by going up into space the way that somebody in the first story finds somebody who is in the second story of their house. He says, you find God the way that Hamlet finds Shakespeare. The only way that Hamlet is going to know if Shakespeare exists is if Shakespeare writes himself into the story. And so that was his response. And so I think hell is similar in the sense that we're not going to discover it through exploration or something like that. And so it's I guess interdimensional or something. But it is a real place in the sense that it is a reality that evildoers and the wicked and idolaters and those who reject Christ are sent to. And so just like the lake of fire, just like all of these things that Jesus talked about it as a real place in the sense of it is a reality. And so I haven't seen that particular video from the Bible Project. And so if they're saying that hell is not a real place, it's just like a state of mind, or it's just people being bad to each other in this life or something like that, if it's a more universalist approach, then we reject that. But if they're saying it's not a real place in the sense that you're not going to drill down into the earth and find it, then sure, that's true. Good. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for 9 weeks of apologetics. Appreciate you guys. See you later.